Hello, I'm Sharon, a 26-year-old high school teacher. I've always believed in the quiet magic of everyday life, a belief that seemed to hold true until I met Alex. Our relationship blossomed rapidly, a whirlwind romance that caught me by surprise. When Alex suggested I meet his parents, I anticipated a normal family introduction. However, the reality was far from what I had expected. The day of the meeting was wrapped in an air of nervous anticipation. As a natural redhead, I've always stood out, but I never imagined it would become a point of contention. We arrived at Alex's parents' home, a quaint suburban house with a well-tended garden. Alex, sensing my anxiety, gave my hand a reassuring squeeze. "Don't worry, Sharon. It'll be fine," he said, trying to comfort me. Yet, the moment we entered, I felt like I had stepped onto unwelcoming territory. Mrs. Johnson, Alex's mother, greeted us with a polite but forced smile. Her eyes, however, narrowed slightly as she took in my appearance. "Oh, a redhead," she said, her tone laced with a hint of disdain. "You know what they say about redheads. They're always the ones to watch out for." I felt my face flush with embarrassment, the comment catching me off guard. Alex, clearly upset by his mother's words, responded with a hint of irritation in his voice. "Mom, that's an old wives' tale. Sharon is nothing like that." Mr. Johnson, who seemed younger than his years, stood by, nodding in agreement with his wife's assessment, but not contributing his own words to the conversation. Attempting to defuse the tension, I tried to turn the comment into a joke. "Well, the only thing I'm guilty of cheating on is my diet," I said, forcing a laugh. However, my attempt at humor fell flat. Mrs. Johnson's expression remained unamused. She turned to Alex, her voice firm and serious. "Alex, she's not right for you. We cannot approve of this." Alex's face grew stern, and he took a step forward, his voice laced with determination. "Mom, Dad, I love Sharon. If you can't accept her, then we'll have to do without your blessing." The rest of the visit passed in a blur of strained politeness and unspoken judgments. As we left, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being unfairly judged and labeled, all because of my hair color. After the unsettling encounter with Alex's parents, we decided to have a small, intimate wedding. It was just us and a few close friends in a little chapel downtown. The absence of Alex's family hung in the air, but we were determined to make the best of our day. On the morning of our wedding, as I was getting ready, my best friend and maid of honor, Sarah, tried to lighten the mood. "Sharon, you look stunning. Alex won't know what hit him," she said with a wink, helping me with the final touches. I smiled, grateful for her support. "Thanks, Sarah. I just wish Alex's parents could see past, well, my hair." Sarah frowned. "Forget about them, Sharon. Today's about you and Alex. It's your love that matters, not their approval." The ceremony was simple yet beautiful. As I walked down the aisle, I saw Alex waiting for me, his eyes brimming with love and emotion. In that moment, all my worries faded away. Alex whispered as I reached him, "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, Sharon." During the vows, Alex held my hands tightly. "Sharon, I may not have my parents here today, but standing with you, I know I have everything I need. You're my family now," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. I replied, my own voice filled with emotion, "Alex, I promise to stand by you, through challenges and joys. Your heart is my home." After the ceremony, our little group celebrated at a local restaurant. The laughter and joy around us were a stark contrast to the rejection we'd faced. Yet, in that small, cozy setting, I felt a sense of peace and belonging. As we cut the cake, Alex said jokingly, "Well, I guess this makes us official partners in crime now, right? Partners against the world?" I laughed, feeling a surge of happiness and love. "Absolutely, partners against the world." That night, as we returned home, Alex held me close. "Sharon, I know today wasn't what we initially dreamed of. But having you by my side makes it perfect." I nestled into his embrace, feeling a sense of completeness. Our quiet wedding, though not grand, was a profound declaration of our love and commitment, a testament to our strength together, despite the odds. After the wedding, Alex and I hoped things would settle down, but the dinners at his parents' house only grew more tense. Each visit was like walking on eggshells, with his mother's thinly veiled comments and the forced politeness of his father. One evening, we were sitting around the dinner table with Mr. and Mrs. Johnson and a couple of their friends. The conversation inevitably turned to gossip, and Mrs. Johnson's friend, Mrs. Blake, started a story about a neighbor. And would you believe it? Caught red-handed, cheating with the gardener. And she was a redhead too, Mrs. Blake exclaimed, casting a sly glance my way. I felt my face heat up. Trying to remain composed, I said, "Well, hair color hardly determines someone's character." Mrs. Johnson chimed in, "Oh, but you know how it is with stereotypes. There's always some truth to them." Alex, noticing my discomfort, quickly tried to change the subject. "Mom, how about we talk about the new garden you were planning? Sharon has some great ideas for landscaping." But the damage was done. The insinuations hung in the air, making the rest of the dinner extremely uncomfortable. As we were leaving, I couldn't help but express my feelings to Alex. "I can't keep doing this. It feels like they're judging me all the time." Alex sighed, a look of frustration crossing his face. "I know, Sharon, and I'm sorry. I just don't understand why they can't give you a chance." On the drive home, we were both quiet, lost in our thoughts. The constant strain of these dinners was taking a toll on me, and I wondered how long we could endure this. The dinners at Alex's parents' house had always been a source of anxiety for me, but they became increasingly difficult when his mother started asking me uncomfortable questions. One such evening, I had reluctantly agreed to accompany Alex, hoping things might be different. But as we sat down for dinner, Mrs. Johnson's intrusive questioning began. "So, Sharon, tell me about your work. How many male teachers are there at your school?" Mrs. Johnson asked, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. I was taken aback by the directness of her question. There are a few, but I haven't really counted." "Why do you ask?" Mrs. Johnson leaned forward, her voice laced with insinuation. "Just curious. Any of them particularly handsome?" I could feel my face flush with discomfort. "I really don't think of my colleagues that way," I replied, trying to keep my voice even. Alex, noticing my discomfort, chimed in, "Mom, why does that matter? Sharon's committed to me, and that's all there is to it." Mrs. Johnson waved her hand dismissively. "I'm just making conversation, dear. No need to get defensive." The dinner continued in this vein, with Mrs. Johnson probing and me trying to deflect her questions. It was clear she was insinuating something about my fidelity, which was both insulting and baseless. On our drive home, I expressed my feelings to Alex. "I can't believe your mom. Her questions tonight were completely out of line. I felt like I was being interrogated." Alex sighed, his hand tightening on the steering wheel. "I know, Sharon, it's ridiculous. I don't understand why she's acting like this." "That's it, Alex. I don't think I can go back there. It's too much for me," I said, the decision weighing heavily on me but feeling necessary for my own peace of mind. Alex was silent for a moment before responding, "I get it, Sharon. And I'm sorry. It's not fair to you. I'll talk to them about it." From then on, I stopped attending the dinners. Alex would go alone, and each time he left, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief that I didn't have to face the awkwardness, and sadness at the rift growing within his family because of me. It had been several weeks since I decided to step away from the uncomfortable dinners at Alex's parents' house. This decision, though made to preserve my sanity, led to a series of unsettling revelations that Alex brought home from his solo visits. Each account seemed more incredulous than the last, leaving us in a state of constant bewilderment and frustration. One such evening, as we curled up on our sofa, the comforting warmth of our home contrasted sharply with the cold tension Alex had carried back. He seemed particularly distressed, his normally calm demeanor replaced by a look of utter disbelief. "Sharon, I'm not sure how to even start explaining what happened tonight," Alex said, his voice heavy with unease. "What happened?" "You look really upset, Alex," I replied, my heart starting to race with worry. He took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "You know I've been going to these dinners alone, right? Well, tonight, Mom took it to another level. She had invited several young women over. It wasn't just a friendly gathering, Sharon. It felt like she was setting up dates for me, as if I wasn't already married." I felt a mix of shock and disbelief wash over me. Setting up dates? But why would she do that? Does she not realize we're married and committed to each other? I tried to make sense of it all, Alex continued, his frustration growing. I asked her outright why she was doing this. Her response was simply that she wanted me to keep my options open. As if our marriage was just a temporary arrangement. Options open? I echoed, incredulous. That's absurd, Alex. We took vows. This isn't some casual fling that she can just dismiss. Alex nodded, his hands clenched in frustration. Exactly. I told her that I'm committed to you, that you're my wife and I love you. But she just seemed to brush it off, as if our marriage was some sort of juvenile phase. The conversation left us both reeling. The next morning, as I recounted the incident to my friend Sarah over a cup of coffee, her reaction mirrored my own. "That's outrageous, Sharon. How can his mother blatantly disrespect your marriage like that? It's almost like she's trying to sabotage it," Sarah exclaimed, her eyes wide with shock. "I don't know, but I can't keep dealing with this. It's like she's living in denial," I replied, feeling drained just thinking about it. Alex and I agreed that we needed to create some distance from his parents. This decision, though difficult, was necessary to protect our marriage from the constant undermining and disrespect. However, the following weeks, though void of direct confrontation, carried an undercurrent of unease and tension. As the days passed, I found myself constantly reflecting on Mrs. Johnson's actions. Her blatant attempts to set Alex up with other women, right under our noses, were a direct attack on our relationship. I wondered what we had done to deserve this treatment. Why was she so intent on destroying our happiness? Alex, too, was deeply troubled. "I just don't understand her, Sharon. Why can't she see how happy we are together? Why can't she accept our marriage?" The distance we created from Alex's parents brought a temporary peace, but that calm was shattered one ordinary school day. I was in the teacher's lounge when Mr. Davis, the school principal, approached me with a concerned expression. "Sharon, can I have a word with you in my office?" he asked in a tone that immediately set me on edge. "Of course, Mr. Davis," I replied, my mind racing with possibilities. In his office, Mr. Davis closed the door and gestured for me to sit. "Sharon, I had a rather unusual visitor today," he began, his brows furrowed in disapproval. My heart sank. "Who was it?" "Your mother-in-law, Mrs. Johnson," he said. "She was asking some very personal questions about you, your behavior at school, and your interactions with male colleagues." I was stunned into silence. The idea that Mrs. Johnson would go to such lengths was beyond belief. "What did you tell her?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "I told her that your personal life is none of our business as long as it doesn't affect your professional conduct, which, by the way, has always been exemplary," Mr. Davis replied firmly. "But Sharon, I must say, this is highly inappropriate and concerning." Gathering my thoughts, I replied, "I'm so sorry, Mr. Davis. I had no idea she would do something like this. I assure you, there's nothing untoward in my conduct at school." "I know that, Sharon. I just thought you should be aware," he said, offering a sympathetic look. As I left his office, a mixture of embarrassment and anger washed over me. The fact that Mrs. Johnson had the audacity to come to my workplace and question my integrity was outrageous. That evening, I recounted the incident to Alex, who listened in shocked silence. I can't believe she did that. Going to your school? Questioning your professionalism? This is going too far, Sharon, he said, his voice laced with anger. I don't know what she's trying to achieve, I said, feeling a mix of frustration and helplessness. But this is a violation of my privacy and my professional life. Alex reached for my hand, his grip firm. We need to confront her, Sharon. This can't go on. She's crossing every line imaginable. The next day, I called Mrs. Johnson, my hands trembling with a mix of nervousness and anger. The phone rang, and when she answered, I took a deep breath. Mrs. Johnson, I need to talk to you about your visit to my school, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Oh, Sharon, I was just looking out for my son's best interests, she replied, her tone dismissive. Looking out for Alex by questioning my character at my workplace? That's completely unacceptable, Mrs. Johnson, I retorted, my frustration boiling over. Well, I just needed to make sure that everything was appropriate, she said, her voice cold. Your actions were inappropriate, and I won't tolerate this kind of invasion into my personal and professional life, I said firmly, drawing a line. Months had passed since the school incident with Mrs. Johnson, and Alex and I had begun to find some semblance of normalcy in our lives again. That fragile peace was shattered one evening when Mrs. Johnson unexpectedly appeared at our doorstep, her face twisted into a triumphant smirk. I knew it. I have proof, Sharon, she exclaimed as soon as I opened the door, not even waiting for an invitation to enter. Alex, hearing the commotion, came to the living room. Mom, what are you talking about? What proof? Mrs. Johnson, brandishing a laptop like a weapon, declared, I hired a private detective. I have photos and videos of Sharon. She's been unfaithful, Alex. I felt my heart drop, confusion and disbelief swirling within me. That's ridiculous. I've never been unfaithful, I protested, my voice firm despite the shock. Ignoring my protest, Mrs. Johnson opened her laptop, revealing a series of photos of me sitting in a cafe with a man sporting bright red hair. Look at these, Alex. See for yourself. Alex and I leaned in to look at the photos. After a moment, we couldn't help but burst into laughter, much to Mrs. Johnson's confusion. That's my brother, Mrs. Johnson, I explained between laughs. He's visiting from out of town. Mrs. Johnson's triumphant expression faltered. Your brother? Yes, my brother, I repeated, still chuckling. We both have the same bright red hair, remember? Alex, now frowning, asked to see the videos. As we watched a clip of me and my brother chatting in the cafe, Alex's attention was drawn to something in the background. Wait, rewind that part, he said, pointing at the screen. We all watched as, in the background of the video, an older man and a younger woman were sitting at a nearby table, engaged in a rather intimate moment. The realization hit us all at once. That's Dad? Alex muttered in disbelief. Mrs. Johnson's face went pale as she recognized her husband in the video, kissing a woman who was definitely not her. The room fell into a stunned silence. The evidence Mrs. Johnson had brought to condemn me had inadvertently exposed her own husband's infidelity. Mom, is that Dad? Alex asked again, his voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Johnson just sat there, speechless, the laptop now forgotten on her lap. That evening, which began with accusations and supposed revelations, ended with a shocking twist that none of us could have predicted. Mrs. Johnson, in her quest to prove my unfaithfulness, had inadvertently uncovered a bitter truth about her own marriage. The night Mrs. Johnson left our house was one we wouldn't forget anytime soon. The living room, where just moments ago she had revealed the photos and videos, felt unnaturally quiet. Alex and I sat there, trying to digest the whirlwind of events. Can you believe it? My dad and Mom's plan backfiring like this? Alex finally broke the silence, a mix of disbelief and sadness in his voice. It's surreal, I replied, still feeling a bit numb. She was so intent on proving me wrong, she didn't see the bigger picture. Alex sighed heavily, looking out the window. I feel like I don't even know my parents anymore. This whole thing, it's just a mess. I nodded in agreement, feeling a pang of empathy for him. I'm sorry, Alex. This must be really hard for you. He turned to face me, his expression softening. You know, in a weird way, I'm grateful for your strength through all this. You could have easily walked away from the drama. I reached out, taking his hand in mine. I wouldn't do that. We're in this together, remember? Over the next few days, Alex's phone was bombarded with calls and messages from his mother. She was frantic, seeking someone to confide in, but Alex wasn't ready to talk. He needed time to process the betrayal and the unraveling of his family. One evening, as we were prepping dinner, Alex brought up the subject again. I spoke to Dad today, he said, chopping vegetables a bit more forcefully than necessary. And, how did that go? I asked, curious yet apprehensive. He admitted everything. Said it had been going on for a while. He's moving out, and they're talking about divorce. Alex's voice was flat, almost detached. That's tough, Alex. I'm sorry you have to go through all this. I reached out to squeeze his arm. He shrugged, a sad smile on his face. It's weird. I'm angry, but also relieved that the truth is out. No more secrets and lies. As the days turned into weeks, the reality of his parents' impending divorce began to sink in. We had many long conversations about trust, honesty, and the complexities of relationships. One night, curled up on the couch, Alex shared his thoughts. You know, Sharon, all this with my parents, it's made me realize how important honesty is. And how much I value what we have. I leaned against him, feeling a sense of solidarity. I agree. It's been a roller coaster, but it's also shown us how strong we can be together. Exactly. We've weathered this storm as a team. It's not been easy, but I feel like we can handle anything now, Alex said, a note of determination in his voice. In the weeks that followed, we saw less of Mrs. Johnson. The revelation of her husband's affair and the subsequent fallout had taken its toll on her. Despite everything, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy for her. But still I couldn't forgive her. Not now. Maybe someday I'll be able to forget about what she did to me. Today, I am completely passionate about my husband, and we are expecting a baby soon. And who knows, he'll probably be as red-haired as me.